then I even forgot my clicker upstairs, too. Oh, alrighty, I'll just hang out over here. So starting, since the class is called Anatomy and Physiology, yes, we should know the differences. What is anatomy versus what is physiology? Because there are some colleges that teach them as two separate classes. We find it works best if you learn them both together. It seems to make more sense to us. Anatomy is studying structures. This basically is what we're doing in lab, is we are naming and looking at structures, which means you do need to know this, and we'll review this in lecture, and I'm like, so you have an idea all of it. Now we can subdivide anatomy into different subdivisions. A lot of it's based on size of structures. Gross anatomy or macroscopic anatomy. Gross anatomy or macro means big. These are things you can see with the unaided eye. I can look and be like, there's the heart. I can see the valves inside the heart. I don't need any microscope to see that. They are larger structures that you can see without the use of a microscope. So you can see it with the unaided eye. It's like the official definition. Now, we can use these even, dividing things down into regional anatomy or systemic anatomy. I can say that my blood vessels and my heart, they're all part of the cardiovascular system. I can see all of those organs. I can see all of those structures. The digestive system, I can see the heart. I can see the intestines. I can see the liver. I can see all of that. I can see the different systems. I can see different regions, the thoracic, the abdominal. I can see all of this stuff. Surface is, basic structures you can see. Microscopic anatomy, what do you think that is? Yeah, it's too small to see it without the use of a microscope. Now, cytology and histology are the two divisions that we consider as microscopic anatomy. Cytology is studying cells. You're going to see cyte in a lot of words. It's anytime we talk about a cell. So cytology is studying cells. You cannot see those without the use of a microscope. Histology is studying tissues. Again, you cannot see a lot of tissue structures unless you use a microscope. And then we also divide anatomy into what we call as developmental anatomy, is how do structures change? The example is embryology. We can look, and I'm like, as an embryo, what an embryo look like at 6 days versus 6 weeks versus 6 months. There are tons of anatomical changes that take place. There are tons of changes that take place in your body from when you were born as an infant until you get to be 90-some years old. That's a lot of changes anatomically that happens. And I'm like, so it's, how structures can change kind of over time as you develop. Physiology, how does it work? So it's not just the structure. It's like, yay, there's the heart. I can label everything on it. I have no idea how it works. That's the physiology portion of it. Now, we will break everything down generally into our organ systems, and we'll kind of link how they all work together. But we're going to be looking at how does the renal system work? How does the cardiovascular system work? And then we'll talk about how they all connect to each other. A lot starts when we look at systems on the cellular level, which is why we're going to be getting into these first few chapters nice and slow, because you got to understand the basics and you have to understand cells. Otherwise, you're going to be lost later on, because a lot of how everything works on these systems all starts at that cellular level and on various chemical reactions and ions and things like that that are happening in the body. Now, to study physiology, yes, we do have to look at lots of different levels, the whole system, as a whole, and then what's happening on the cellular level, the molecular level. We are going to have to look at some basic physical properties. This is not a physics class. I'm not a physics teacher, thank goodness. But we will briefly talk about some what's happening in an electrical current, moving of charges. How does pressure affect things, movement of things across membranes. And we'll have to look at some basic chemical principles, which we'll do on Thursday. Now, anatomy and physiology are inseparable, which is why I still find it weird that some colleges teach them as separate classes. Because you have to understand the structure of something to understand what it does, and vice versa. And I'm like, function, how something works, reflects its structure. The heart has 4 chambers. It has valves. Why? And I'm like, it's made that way, you know, to prevent backflow and to get blood everywhere, to get oxygen, deliver oxygen, you know. I'm like, there's a function to its structure. And so what a structure can do depends on its form. And I'm like, if you change one valve, will the heart work correctly? No, and then you have to have some type of valve replacement. And I'm like, it's because I'm like, that function is dependent on a structure and how it's formed. So examples, that was kind of my one, you know, the heart and the valves. And I'm like, other examples, I'm like, I wrote like a whole list. I don't know if you need them all. We'll get into it, but I'm like, just how various, you know, the intestines are formed. We'll get into how they absorb and what helps increase absorption rates. There's additional structures that help increase that. It's structure versus function. Now, levels, I was going to say, I went over a slide, didn't I? Oh, no, I didn't. And I'm like, this whole fact, I was going to say, I just didn't mention it because it'll be on the top. This whole idea, the fact that how something works is dependent on its structure, it's called the principle of complementarity. It's way at the top. You know, you need one for the other one to work correctly. And yes, if something is not structured correctly, it will not function correctly. So they have to complement each other. Now, the levels of organization. You will have to know these in order. And I'm like, the levels of organization, and this is kind of how we're starting off too in the class, is we're going to be looking at the chemicals. That's our next chapter. It's our next PowerPoint. Looking at atoms, molecules, and then we'll even get into some of the organelles as we then get into cells. And so I'm like, we have to have atoms and molecules. They're found in cells. That's our cellular level. You put a bunch of group of similar working cells together, and you end up with a tissue. That'll be our next chapter. Tissues, or I'm like, we've got all these different tissues. 2 or more types of tissues makes up an organ. You know, some type of structure that does a very specific job. 2 or more organs that work together, and I'm like, where it's usually a lot more than 2, make up an organ system. And that's when we'll get into the integumentary system and everything that makes it up. The digestive system, the urinary system, made up of all these organs that work together. And when you have all the organ systems that work together, you have the organismal level. You are an organism, and you have a whole bunch of organ systems that are all working together to make sure that you are alive. So, nice little order. Good order to know. I was going to say, picture in your book, figure 1.1 is just showing that, you know, your atoms and molecules, they can be found in organs. They make up the cellular level, the tissue level, the organ system level, and then the organismal level. Now, since we need cells, I'm like, interdependence on body cells. Humans are multicellular. We have millions of cells. And for us to live, to function correctly, we need to keep our cells alive. So all cells depend on organ systems, not just one, to meet all of their survival needs. And I'm like, your heart cells are not just depending on your blood vessels. And I'm like, they're depending on the respiratory system to make sure there's oxygen. They're dependent on the urinary system to make sure, you know, the blood gets cleaned. And I'm like, they're all dependent on each other. So all body functions get spread among different organ systems. It's not just clear, cut, and dry. They all have to work together. You can't remove one organ system and survive. Organ systems have to cooperate to maintain life. And I was going to say, in lab, we kind of looked at those 11 organ systems, and you labeled or listed a couple different organs that are found in each of those. I'm not going to go into all of them, but we've got 11 different organ systems. This is just an example of kind of how they work together. You know, yes, the heart is pumping blood around, but the nutrients from the digestive system get into our blood supply. So the digestive system brings nutrients. The heart pumps those nutrients around. When that blood is going around, it's picking up oxygen from the respiratory system. It's getting cleaned in the urinary system. Some of the waste and stuff are hanging out in interstitial fluid. And then around our entire body that protects all of this is our integumentary system. It's like all working together. I don't want to go through all these. There we go. I was going to say, because it's kind of lab. There you go. Sorry. There's all your basic 11 organ systems, or your 11 basic organ systems. Now, for us to survive, we do need the appropriate amount of nutrients oxygen, water, body temperature, and atmospheric pressure. Everything is appropriate amounts. Too much or too little of any of these can be detrimental or deadly. So we need appropriate amount of nutrients eating healthy. We need the appropriate amount of oxygen. If you have too little, you won't live. Even too many can start to do bad things to various organ systems. You need the appropriate amount of water. Too much water is bad for you. And I'm like, because you're flushing out too many ions. We need the appropriate body temperature and atmospheric pressure. If you like atmospheric pressure, we need the appropriate atmospheric pressure for us to breathe correctly. And so I'm like, that's all part of the respiratory system. Now, just some examples of some of these survival needs. Nutrients, yeah, we need chemicals for energy and cell building. It's why you have to eat 3 square meals a day, which includes carbohydrates, fats, proteins, minerals, and vitamins. Hopefully you eat somewhat healthy. We also need oxygen, or you cannot make ATP. We need water as our most abundant chemical in our body. It helps in various chemical reactions. I was going to say, most of the fluids in our body are water-based. You've all heard from middle school and up, like, you're mostly water. You are. And I'm like, because water is everywhere. Most of the fluids in you are all water-based. We need our normal body temperature of about 37 degrees Celsius. If it gets too high, if it gets too low, the chemical reactions in your body will not take place. You may die. We need the atmospheric pressure for gas exchange. I already mentioned that. And we need to keep everything in our body the same. It's called homeostasis. Thank you. It's called homeostasis. The word itself, when we break it down, means same state. We want to keep our body the same. No one likes change. Our body doesn't either. We want to try to keep us exactly the same. And so the official definition is maintaining relatively stable internal conditions despite continuous changes in the environment. AKA, we want to stay the same. We don't care what happens out in our world and what we eat and what we drink. And I'm like, we don't care about anything else. We don't care if our oxygen levels change. We don't care about temperature. Our body just wants to stay the exact same at 37 degrees with the correct amount of oxygen and everything else. And so it's this constant state of equilibrium of something goes up, we need to bring it back down. Something goes down, we need to bring it back up. We always want to try to stay the same. And our organ systems together as a whole are trying to keep that happening. So we've got all these monitoring things that are monitoring when something's increasing or decreasing or changing from the norm. Anything that can change is considered a variable. And the big communicators of change, nervous system and endocrine system. These are the two big systems that are monitoring, what's changing. The nervous system can communicate and it can send electrical signals of, hey, this is happening. The endocrine system sends hormones. And I'm like, it's either way. It's communicating that something has to change. An example of a hormone is you just got done eating a Snickers bar. What is that going to do to your blood sugar level? Go up. But what do we want it to do? Because we don't want to increase anything too much. Yeah, we want it to bring it down so it stays the same. And so our pancreas can send out information using what hormone? Pancreas. Anyone? Insulin, and it can help bring it back down. And I'm like, so it's constantly monitoring our blood sugar. Now, the components of, it's components of the control mechanism, just this fact of monitoring and adapting and doing something about it. We have to have a receptor that's being like, I sense change. So you have to have a receptor. And I'm like, that's receiving information, some stimulus change. So it's monitoring the environment and it will respond to a stimulus. So it's just being, I'm going to use the example of, it's cold outside. I'm like, your skin has lots of receptors in them that are monitoring temperature. And so those are receptors in our skin that are detecting some type of stimuli like temperature. You have a control center in your body that determines what is the set point that we want to keep that temperature at. And I'm like, or some other type of, set point, whether it's sugar levels or nutrient levels. So we need to, some part of our body has to set the point of what is normal. Any guess what part of the body that normally is? That's our control center, the brain. And I'm like, it normally is the one that figures out whether something's too high or too low. It's not always. Sometimes you've got different organs that can modify things. And it's going to be the part that says, what should we do about this new change? And then you have an effector of, okay, some organ has to be, told, we had a change. You need to do something. Now, my example, I've got other pictures coming up, and I'm like, it's cold outside, and you walked outside without a jacket. All of your skin receptors are detecting that change, that it is cold. And all of those little receptors are sending information to your brain, your control center, and your brain's like, holy cow, well, first you were dumb, so you didn't put a jacket on. And I'm like, but they're like, we need to do something about it. And what happens when you get cold? What happens to your body? You can get goosebumps, and you start shivering. And so your control center, your brain is going to send information to muscles that cause shivering, and even goosebumps that's a muscle that's doing that. And I'm like, is your brain is sending information to muscles? That's your effector organ that says, hey, we need to warm up. And that's the contracting, even goosebumps warms you up. And I'm like, we need to do something about it. And you start shivering to try to increase body temperature. So there's always something that's detecting, something that's like, we need to do something, and this is what we should do. And then there's some part of the body that's going to have to do something about it. It's the effector. So this is kind of the whole balance. I'm like, there's a stimulus, you got cold. The receptor detects it in your skin. It sends information to the control center. I put it as my 3.5. Between the receptor and the control center, we call that the input pathway or the afferent pathway. And I'm like, it's just sending information to the control center. It's just sending input of information to the control center. Afferent, I always think A for afferent, because afferent, only one letter different. A is for approaching, because it's approaching the control center. The brain says, we need to shiver, or we need to have goosebumps. And it will send that information through the efferent pathway, or the output pathway, E for exit, to the effector organ. In this case, it was muscles. And the muscles are going to do some type of response. So it's kind of, what's happening? And this is happening all over your body and like everything you're doing right now as you're sitting there. Now, what response your body has, it's either going to be a positive feedback response or a negative feedback response. Negative is about 95% of them. It just means, it does the opposite. I was going to say the opposite direction of the initial change. And I was like, what? It means if your body temperature will go, your body temperature goes up, or your body temperature goes down, our body needs to bring it back up. That's an opposite. And I'm like, if you go outside on a 100-degree day, your body temperature goes up. Our body wants to bring it back down. It's doing the opposite, so that at some point somewhere in there, it's the same again. It's going to stay at 37 degrees Celsius to stay the same. So it's always doing an opposite. If your blood sugar goes up because you ate a Snickers bar, now you're going to be hungry. And I'm like, our pancreas does hormones to bring it back down. That's an opposite change to try to maintain. So it's always an opposite is a negative feedback. So you're always trying to do an opposite. That's the negative part. Something goes up, we bring it down. Something goes down, we bring it up. And I'm like, we're doing the opposite. Examples, regulating body temperature. Just like I said before, you go outside, it's cold. Regulating blood volume even. If you just got done drinking, a 2-liter bottle of water because you're really thirsty, and I'm like, that increases your blood volume. There are hormones, that we'll get to later. There's a hormone that's like, hey, we have way too much blood volume. We need to get rid of it. And what do you have to do? You have to drink 2 liters of water. You gotta go pee. And so I'm like, and so you gotta figure out a way how to get rid of all that blood volume, and you've got hormones that can try to regulate that and bring your blood volume back down, aka you're gonna use the bathroom. So it's doing an opposite. Blood volume up, let's bring it back down. Here is the example, sweating, shivering, kind of already said already. A positive feedback response, not as common, but it enhances or exaggerates the original stimulus. And sometimes it makes it, I was going to have an amplifying effect. So if one thing happens, like it happens more and more and more. Biggest example, what happens in labor contractions? And I'm like, is you have hormone levels that are creating labor contractions. And I'm like, and as your uterus is contracting, your body's not like, ooh, contractions, let's stop. Or no one would ever be born. And I'm like, and so those contractions, they get harder and faster until eventually you have the kid. That's exaggerating and amplifying. And I'm like, so that's a positive feedback response. And I'm like, rare. Another big common example are your platelet plugs and blood clotting. If you have a broken blood vessel, you got a cut, a paper cut, whatever, and you're bleeding, and I'm like, we've got platelets that are going to go to that broken blood vessel, and because they're going there, they're recruiting others to go there. So it's like platelets going to one area are causing more platelets to go to that area. It's an exaggerated or amplifying effect so that you form it so that you stop bleeding, which in theory, you know, that's our homeostasis. We want to maintain our level of blood and not die from bleeding out. There you go. Now, this will work out time perfect-wise. I always have these. I think if you printed them, you've got them. Review questions, and I have P, O, Y, or G. Any guess what P, O, Y, or G? Pink, orange, yellow, or green. You are going to get a set of 4 flashcards, depending on how fast I can hand these out. So, you know, pass a pink. Down, I'll come back there too. Hold on to these, keep these, bring these back with you every time. I'll start on the back and then we'll work our way forward. I'll collect all the extras at the end. Ooh, I just stole all the pink. Here's pink. Orange. I can collect the extras as long as they're everywhere. Does everyone have a pink, orange, yellow, or green? Again, keep these in your binder. I've had some people that hole punch them, you know, like one hole, because that's all, it's not going to fit anywhere else. One hole, and they keep it in their binder. I don't really care. Bring them back with you. I always try to put these in there. One, it gauges me if you're understanding based on your answers. And two, if you're falling asleep, it wakes you up. It's my twofold. We'll go with the first one if anyone asks, but my second is if it wakes you up. Now, because the people in the back are like, haha, we're in the back, and we're going to cheat off the people in the front. Because if you're like, first, what do you think it is? I don't care if you say it this time. And you're like, orange, and all the people in the back are like, haha, we just copied everyone in the front. Don't let them copy off of you. What you can do, you have 4 cards in front of you. And I'm like, stack them together. Show me the orange, but all the people behind you think maybe something else. Don't let them cheat off of you in the front. Not that any of you would ever do that. And yes, the correct answer is orange. What about this one? The anatomy of a body part is intimately tied to its function. Scientists call this principle of... And hold it up. Again, if you get it wrong, you get it wrong. That's fine. Eventually you'll circle the correct answer on your notes, and you'll know it then. I don't care. It is orange again. It's the principle of complementarity. That form and function. Which of the following is a logical organization? I didn't include all levels. It is the green. Atoms, then molecules, then cells, then tissues. What is the definition of homeostasis? I was going to say, sorry if this looks really small for people on the back. Hopefully you still can read it on your PowerPoint in front of you. Tricky, huh? I was going to say, yes, but if you read the first one, I'm like, pink and green are almost the same. Almost. But it's the green that you can maintain relatively stable internal conditions despite the outside world changes. So I don't care if it's cold out, your body can still maintain 98.6 degrees. Which of these is an example of a negative feedback response? I'm sorry that it's long and wordy. If you don't know, guess anyways. It's 3. You get a 1 and 3 choice. Pink, orange, or yellow. It's wordy enough, I didn't want to agree. And again, got it wrong, I don't care. I care. It is the orange out of the 3, and I'm like, hopefully you didn't choose pink because that was our major one with our positive feedback response. But it is, you know, the releasing of hormone to decrease in case something goes up. I put this in there because I think at one point I didn't talk about the anatomical position somewhere, and it's in there, but we talked about it anyways in lab. Let me stop. Is it not doing anything? Did it not even record? It said it was recording and did a countdown, right? Awesome.